A white officer stops a black judge at the courthouse. What happened next shocked everyone. Leah Marshall's sedan screeched to a stop in front of the New Orleans courthouse. 10 minutes until trial. Her pulse quickened, not from the rush, but from the weight of what this day meant. Today wasn't just another case. It was the case, one that could reshape how Louisiana handled racial profiling. And for Leah, an accomplished black judge, it was personal. Kevin Daniels, a young black man, had been arrested in his own neighborhood for fitting a description. It was the same hollow excuse Leah had heard far too many times before. This trial could set a precedent. She stepped out, heels clicking with purpose, inhaling the thick August air. Instead of braving the media swarm at the grand entrance, she cut toward a side door. Fewer cameras, fewer distractions. That's when she saw him. A young white officer stood at the side entrance, posture stiff, eyes tracking her every move. Leah reached for her ID badge, ready to flash it and move on. But before she could lift it, he stepped forward, blocking her path. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification," he said, voice clipped. Leah raised an eyebrow. "I'm Judge Marshall," she replied, holding the badge higher. "I'm presiding over the Daniels case this morning." He didn't even glance at it. His gaze swept over her slowly, cold, measuring. "There's been an incident nearby," he said. "You match the description of someone involved. I'll need you to answer a few questions." The bitter irony hit hard. She was minutes away from presiding over a racial profiling case, and was now being racially profiled at the courthouse door. "Officer," she said evenly, though her heartbeat thundered. "The trial starts in less than 10 minutes. I need to get inside." Again, she extended her badge. Again, he ignored it. His hand hovered near his belt, close to the cuffs. "I don't care who you say you are, ma'am," the young officer snapped, stepping closer. "You're coming with me." Leah's breath caught. This was spiraling quickly. She recognized the look in his eyes, suspicion laced with contempt. The same look she'd seen too many times growing up in the South. In this moment, it wasn't about her robe or her title. It was about her skin. Before she could answer, a firm voice cut through the air. "What's going on here?" She turned to see an older black officer striding toward them, his face shifting from concern to surprise, then recognition. "Marshall?" His eyes widened. "Judge Marshall?" "Yes," Leah said, her voice clipped. The older officer's gaze snapped to the rookie. "Stand down." The younger man's jaw clenched. "She matches the description," he muttered. "That's the judge," the older man barked. "Do you want to lose your job?" The rookie mumbled something under his breath, but stepped back, stiff with resentment. Leah inhaled slowly, forcing her pulse to steady. Losing her temper now would only hand him power. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the older officer asked, his voice softer now. "I'm fine," she said, though her jaw remained tight. She turned and walked into the courthouse without another word. The sterile, familiar halls closed around her like a shield, but the encounter played on a relentless loop in her mind. She had faced racism her entire life, but for it to happen here, on this day, was almost too much. For it to happen here, on this day, was almost too much. The courtroom fell silent as Leah brought down her gavel, the sound echoing like a warning shot. She called the room to order, her voice steady, but her mind was still tethered to the courthouse steps, to that young officer's sneer, to the way he had sized her up and dismissed her in an instant. The trial moved forward. Opening statements from both sides were delivered with practiced precision, but Leah's thoughts kept drifting back. The case before her felt too close to the bone. Then Kevin Daniels took the stand. Leah leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on him. His testimony was raw, a wound laid bare. He told of being stopped while walking in his own neighborhood, doing nothing wrong, not even acting suspiciously, and yet treated like a criminal. Handcuffed. Humiliated in front of his neighbors. Leah had heard stories like this more times than she could count. But today, it wasn't just about Kevin Daniels. It was about every person who had endured the same injustice. And it was about her. Halfway through, the back door creaked open. Leah's stomach tightened. The young officer from earlier stepped inside. His face was pale now, stripped of the arrogance he'd carried that morning. The prosecutor rose. "We'd like to call Officer Bill Wilkins to the stand." Bill Wilkins. Leah hadn't known his name until now. She watched him cross the room, stiff and awkward, and lower himself into the witness chair. She reminded herself to stay impartial, to be professional, but it was hard. This was the same man who had looked at her not as a judge, but as a suspect. Wilkins shifted in his seat, discomfort etched into every movement. "I was patrolling the neighborhood when I saw Daniels," he began, his voice lacking the confidence he'd shown hours earlier. "He looked out of place. Like he didn't belong there." Leah's grip on the gavel tightened. Out of place. She knew exactly what that meant. The prosecutor's tone sharpened. "And what exactly made Mr. Daniels look out of place, Officer Wilkins?" Wilkins fidgeted. He was acting nervous, looking around. Seemed like he was up to something. Leah felt the heat rise in her chest again. She'd read the case file in detail. Kevin Daniels had been standing on a corner, waiting for his rideshare. No crime. No suspicious behavior. Nothing but the fact that, in the eyes of the police, he was a black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. The prosecutor pressed on. "Did you find anything on Mr. Daniels that suggested he had committed a crime?" Wilkins hesitated, color creeping into his cheeks. "No," he admitted. "We didn't." A heavy silence settled over the room. Leah could feel the tension thickening, pressing in from all sides. She glanced toward the jury. Some faces were troubled, others conflicted. But the truth was plain as day. Kevin Daniels had been arrested for nothing more than existing in his own skin. Wilkins's testimony continued, unraveling thread by thread. Each question the prosecutor asked pulled apart his version of events. Small contradictions appeared. His confidence drained. Leah watched closely. His eyes kept flicking toward her, uneasy, almost apologetic. He knew who she was now. And he knew exactly what he'd done that morning outside the courthouse. When the prosecutor finally stepped back, Wilkins looked hollow, a shell of the man who had tried to detain her hours earlier. Leah felt no pity. Only the weight of what this moment meant. This case wasn't just about one wrongful arrest. It was about an entire system that had allowed officers like Wilkins to operate unchecked. She fought to keep her emotions in check. She had to remain neutral, had to ensure justice was done. But the parallels between her own morning and the trial before her were impossible to ignore. By the end of the day, the room was heavy with tension. The defense painted Wilkins as a well-meaning officer who'd made an honest mistake. Leah knew better. So did the prosecutor. Samantha Green rose for her closing argument. Her voice was steady, powerful. "This case is not just about Kevin Daniels," she told the jury. "It's about a pattern, one we've seen far too often in our justice system. It's about officers like Bill Wilkins, who see a young black man in a neighborhood and assume he must be up to no good. It's about how those assumptions lead to wrongful arrests, humiliation, and injustice. And it's time to say enough." The courtroom was silent. Leah could feel it, the shift in the air. The jury was listening. They understood. When court adjourned, Leah stayed seated a moment longer. She had done her job, presiding fairly. But the encounter outside still gnawed at her. A reminder that no matter her title or accomplishments, some people would always see her through the lens of her race. The door opened quietly. Sergeant Michael Harris, the older officer who had stepped in that morning, approached the bench, concern etched in his face. "Judge Marshall," he said softly. "Can I have a word?" Leah looked up, surprised. "Of course." Harris exhaled, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened earlier. With Wilkins, he's not a bad kid, you know. But he's got blind spots. Like a lot of them do." Leah held his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Blind spots?" she repeated, the bitterness in her voice unmistakable. "You mean racism?" Harris winced but didn't push back. Maybe. Probably. But I want you to know, I'm trying to fix it from the inside. She studied him for a long moment. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe real change was possible. But after everything she had seen, everything she had lived, hope felt like a fragile thing that could shatter in her hands. What do you suggest I do? She asked quietly. When I sit up here day after day, hearing cases like this, knowing exactly what it feels like firsthand? He was silent for a long time before finally answering. You keep doing what you're doing, Judge. Keep holding people accountable. That's the only way anything changes. Leah nodded slowly. The weight on her shoulders didn't lift. The trial wasn't over, and there would be more battles ahead. But for today, at least, she had taken one step forward. As Harris left, she glanced around the empty courtroom. The fight was far from over, but today, justice had been served. That, she told herself, was a start. The next morning, the air in the courthouse was thick with anticipation. The jury had been deliberating all night. Today would bring their decision, one that mattered not just for Kevin Daniels, but for the countless eyes watching from across the country. In her chambers, Leah sat at her desk, coffee cooling beside her. She stared at the files spread before her, willing herself into calm. Outside, the muffled sounds of reporters and protesters filled the air. This was no longer just a local trial. It had become a national flashpoint, a symbol of the systemic racism still embedded in law enforcement. Her thoughts drifted back to the day before. Bill Wilkins, the officer who had profiled her, had sat in the witness chair, visibly shaken. She had seen the hairline cracks in his voice, the tension in his posture. He wasn't an anomaly. He was a product of a flawed institution. Leah knew this case was about more than holding one man accountable. It was about forcing a conversation that America had avoided for too long. The responsibility she carried felt crushing, but she also knew it was necessary. This trial was about justice in one case, and the urgent need to reform a system that normalized bias and profiling. A knock at the door pulled her back. "Come in," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Her clerk, Emily, stepped in, a folder in hand. "The jury's ready," she said softly. Leah rose, smoothing her robe. "Let's do this." The walk to the bench. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway. The courthouse felt different today, charged, heavy. The tension wasn't just in the courtroom. It hung in every corner, in every whisper. Inside, the gallery was packed. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, cameras aimed. The families of both Kevin Daniels and Officer Wilkins sat in the front rows, each group tense and silent. Leah took her place at the bench, her eyes moving first to Kevin. His expression was solemn, but there was a glint of hope there, a fragile belief that justice might finally reach him. Then she looked at Wilkins. The confidence he'd worn at the start of the trial was gone. His eyes darted nervously, and for the first time since this began, he looked small. Both families sat in the front rows, tense and unmoving, each side holding its breath. Leah took her place at the bench, her eyes settling briefly on Kevin Daniels. He sat beside his attorney, posture straight, face somber, yet in his eyes there was the faint glint of hope. Hope that justice would be more than just a word today. Hope that this trial might actually mean something. Her gaze shifted to Bill Wilkins. He was nothing like the officer who had walked in on the first day, no trace of swagger, no edge of authority. His eyes darted around the room, restless, searching for anywhere to land but on her. For the first time since the trial began, he looked small. Like a man who'd finally realized he couldn't outrun what he'd done. Leah cleared her throat. "Please bring in the jury." Her voice carried through the stillness. The doors opened, and 12 jurors filed in, their footsteps hushed against the polished floor. Leah studied them as they took their seats, scanning their faces for any hint of what was coming. But their expressions were unreadable, eyes fixed straight ahead. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with dark hair drawn back into a tight bun, held a folded slip of paper as if it were a lifeline. "In the case of Officer Bill Wilkins, we, the jury, Find the defendant guilty of wrongful arrest and racial discrimination. A ripple moved through the courtroom, a collective exhale, a murmur of voices. Leah turned to Kevin Daniels. For a moment, he sat frozen, his face blank. Then relief began to break through, his shoulders easing as his lawyer placed a hand on his back. His eyes shone, though he blinked quickly to hold back the tears. Leah's gaze shifted to Wilkins. He stared straight ahead, his face pale, his hands knotted tightly together on the table. The verdict's weight had landed, and for an instant she thought he might crack. She brought the gavel down once. Court is adjourned. The room erupted into movement, reporters rushing for the exits, spectators filing out, when suddenly, Wilkins stood. "Your Honor," he said, his voice breaking. Leah froze, eyes narrowing slightly as she looked down at him. The courtroom fell silent again, every eye turning toward the young officer. Wilkins stood trembling, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides. I need to say," he faltered, swallowing hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting the community. But I was wrong." His voice wavered, thick with emotion. "I see now that I let my assumptions, my prejudices, cloud my judgment. And I'm sorry." The silence that followed was suffocating. Leah felt her breath catch. It was an apology, perhaps even a sincere one, but it wasn't enough. It couldn't undo what had been done. She thought of all the times she'd stood where Kevin Daniels had stood, stopped for nothing more than being black. Those memories were scars, and no words could erase them. She met Wilkins' eyes, her voice calm but unyielding. "Your apology is noted, Officer Wilkins. But the harm caused by your actions, and actions like yours, runs deep. It shapes lives, fractures families, and erodes trust in entire communities. Saying sorry doesn't repair that." Wilkins nodded, his shoulders sagging. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply stood there, absorbing the weight of her words. For the first time, Leah saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. The courtroom slowly emptied. Kevin Daniels embraced his family, his face etched with both relief and exhaustion. Wilkins lingered quietly by the exit, waiting to be escorted out, his guilt hanging on him like a heavy coat. Leah stayed seated, her mind turning over the truths she couldn't escape. She had done her job, upheld the law, and presided fairly, but it wasn't enough. This case was one drop in an ocean of injustice. For every Kevin Daniels who found a measure of justice, there were countless others whose stories would never be told. The door opened again. Sergeant Michael Harris stepped inside. Leah looked up, surprised. He approached with a quiet, measured step, his expression a blend of concern and, faintly, hope. "Judge Marshall," he said softly. "Can I have a word?" She nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "Of course." Harris folded his hands on the bench between them. "I just wanted to say thank you." Leah arched an eyebrow. "For what?" "For handling this case the way you did," Harris replied. "For holding us accountable. We need that. The system needs that." Leah exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. "I appreciate that, Sergeant. But it doesn't feel like enough. This was just one case. There are so many more out there. So many people who'll never get justice." "You're right," Harris said with a thoughtful nod. "But that's why we keep pushing. It's not going to change overnight. Every step matters. Every case like this chips away at the bigger problem." Leah was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe real change was possible. But after all she had seen, holding on to that hope felt like balancing glass in a storm. "What about Wilkins?" she asked quietly. "What happens to officers like him, the ones who've been trained to think a certain way?" Harris sighed. "I'm not going to lie, it's hard. There are a lot of guys like him. But there are also people like me, trying to change things from the inside. And I'll keep doing that as long as I can." Leah studied his face, the weariness, the lines of experience, and beneath it, the stubborn determination she recognized in herself. You keep doing what you're doing, Judge, Harris said, standing. That's how we change this. Piece by piece. Leah nodded slowly. Piece by piece, she echoed. When Harris left, she sat back in her chair, staring at the empty courtroom. The fight was far from over. It never would be. But today, they had moved forward, and that was how change began. As the last echoes of the verdict faded from the room, Leah Marshall remained at the bench. The trial was over, but its ripple had only begun. Justice, she knew, wasn't confined to this courtroom. It reached beyond these walls, into neighborhoods and lives still living the story that had brought Kevin Daniels here in the first place. Leah gathered her files, ready to retreat to her chambers, when a voice pulled her from her thoughts. It was Kevin Daniels, walking toward her with his attorney. The tension of the last few days still lingered on his face, but now it was tempered by calm resolve. Judge Marshall, Kevin said, his voice low but steady. I just wanted to say, thank you. For everything. Leah paused, meeting his gaze. You don't need to thank me, Kevin. I was just doing my job. He shook his head. No. It's more than that. This trial, it wasn't just about me. It was about showing people what really happens out there. What we go through. You gave me a voice. Her chest tightened. She understood, too well, and she nodded slowly. I hope this is a step toward change. But it's just one case. We still have a long way to go. I know, Kevin said, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. But it's a start. And for that I'm grateful. Leah watched him leave, his attorney close behind. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more left to do. One trial, one verdict, could not dismantle a system built over centuries. But Kevin was right, it was a start. She made her way toward the side exit, wanting to avoid the wall of cameras and microphones swarming the courthouse steps. But when she pushed open the door, she froze. Officer Bill Wilkins stood outside, leaning against the building. His face was pale, drawn, and his uniform seemed to hang looser on him, as though the weight of the trial had shrunk him. They locked eyes. For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them was thick, part guilt, part anger, part something she couldn't name. Judge Marshall, Wilkins said at last, his voice hoarse. He straightened, eyes fixed on hers. I didn't expect to see you here. Leah waited, silent. She didn't know what he could say that would matter now, but she gave him the moment. I've been thinking, he said slowly, each word heavy, about what happened in there. And about what I did to you. I know saying sorry isn't enough, it won't undo it, but I need you to know. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Her eyes narrowed. She had heard this before, too many times. You didn't mean for it to happen, she repeated, her tone icy. But it did happen, Officer Wilkins. And it keeps happening, to people like Kevin. To people like me. So forgive me if I'm not moved by your remorse right now. He winced, but didn't step back. I know I screwed up. I let my biases take over. I'm trying to understand that now. But it's not simple. You don't just unlearn what you've been taught your whole life overnight. I was trained to see things a certain way, and I never questioned it. Not until now. Leah crossed her arms, studying him. And what's changed? The fact that you got caught? Or the fact that someone finally called you out? He swallowed hard but didn't answer. The silence said enough. Leah turned to leave, the words piece by piece echoing in her mind, the same words Sergeant Harris had said earlier. She wasn't sure if Wilkins would ever change, but she knew this much, the fight wasn't over. It never would be. Today was one step. And that was how change began. One trial, one verdict. It wasn't enough to dismantle a system built over centuries. But Kevin was right, it was a start. Leah sighed and gathered her things, her steps toward her chambers slow and deliberate. She had no interest in walking into the swarm of cameras and microphones waiting at the front entrance, so she slipped toward the side door, hoping for a quiet exit. But the moment she pushed it open, she froze. Officer Bill Wilkins stood there, leaning against the wall. His face was drawn and pale, his uniform hanging on him as if the weight of the trial had hollowed him out. Leah's heart thudded. Neither of them spoke at first. The air between them was heavy, guilt, anger, and something unspoken pressing in from all sides. "Judge Marshall," Bill said finally, his voice hoarse. He straightened, locking eyes with her. I didn't expect to see you here." Leah stayed silent, waiting. She doubted there was anything he could say that would change a thing, but she gave him the moment. "I've been thinking," he began slowly, each word deliberate. "About everything. About what happened in there, and about what I did to you." His hands fidgeted at his sides. "I know saying sorry isn't enough. It won't fix what I did. But I need you to know. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Her eyes narrowed. She'd heard this before, too many times. Variations of the same excuse, dressed up as remorse. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" she repeated, her voice cold. "It did happen, Officer Wilkins. And it keeps happening, to people like Kevin. To people like me. So forgive me if I'm not moved by your remorse right now." Bill winced, but didn't look away. "I know I screwed up. I let my biases take over. I'm trying to understand that now, but it's not as simple as flipping a switch. You don't just unlearn everything overnight. I was taught to see the world a certain way, and I never questioned it. Not until now." Leah crossed her arms, her expression still hard. "And what's changed? The fact that you got caught, or the fact that someone finally called you out?"